Officer Jake Reynolds never imagined that a routine patrol would turn into the most emotional night of his life. When a small, scruffy kitten began following him during his usual route, he thought it was just another stray. But the kitten had something else in mind. "Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Real quick, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you love stories about animals doing amazing things, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another story." Now, let's get into what happened that night in Brooksville. Brooksville was the kind of town where nothing much happened. Quiet streets, families who knew each other by name. The kind of place where the most exciting thing that happened all week was Mrs. Patterson's cat getting stuck in a tree or teenagers skateboarding too fast through the town square. Officer Jake Reynolds had been patrolling these streets for 7 years, and he'd seen it all. Or, at least, he thought he had. It was a Tuesday night in late September. The air had that cool, crisp feeling that came right before autumn really settled in. Jake's shift was nearly over. He'd checked the usual spots, made sure the local shops were locked up tight, and waved at old Mr. Henderson, who always sat on his porch smoking his pipe and watching the world go by. Everything was normal. Everything was quiet. Jake was already thinking about getting home, kicking off his boots, and maybe watching the game. He was walking back to his patrol car, parked near the corner of Maple Street and 4th Avenue, when he heard it. A sound so small he almost missed it. A soft, high-pitched meow. Jake stopped and looked around. Nothing, just the streetlights casting long shadows on the empty sidewalk. He shrugged and kept walking. Then he heard it again. Meow. This time closer, more insistent. Jake turned and saw it. A kitten, small, scruffy, with patchy gray and white fur that looked like it hadn't been groomed in weeks. The kitten sat in the middle of the sidewalk, staring directly at him. Its green eyes were wide and unblinking. It didn't look scared. It looked determined. Jake smiled despite himself. He'd always had a soft spot for animals. As a kid, he'd brought home every stray dog and bird with a broken wing he could find, much to his mother's frustration. But he was on duty, and bringing a stray kitten into his patrol car wasn't exactly protocol. He crouched down and held out his hand. "Hey there, little guy. You lost?" The kitten didn't move. It just kept staring at him. Then, without warning, it turned and walked a few steps away. Stopped, turned back, meowed again, louder this time. Jake frowned. That was odd. The kitten wasn't running away. It wasn't coming toward him for comfort or food. It was doing something else, something deliberate. The kitten took a few more steps, stopped again, and looked back at Jake. Then it meowed once more as if to say, "Are you coming or not?" Jake stood up slowly, his instincts kicking in. Something about the kitten's behavior felt off. It wasn't acting like a typical stray. It was acting like it had a purpose, like it was trying to tell him something. Have you ever had an animal act strangely around you, like they were trying to communicate something important? Maybe a dog that wouldn't stop barking at a specific spot, or a bird that kept circling your house. Animals have instincts we don't fully understand, and sometimes they know things we don't. Jake decided to follow. Just for a minute, he told himself, just to see where this goes. The kitten started walking again, staying just a few feet ahead of Jake, glancing back every few seconds to make sure he was still there. The kitten didn't slow down. If anything, it moved faster now, its small paws pattering against the pavement with renewed urgency. Jake followed, his boots echoing through the empty streets of Brooksville. The town felt different at this hour, quieter, almost eerie in its stillness. Street lights cast long shadows that stretched across the sidewalks like dark fingers reaching toward him. The kitten turned sharply into a narrow alley between two brick buildings. Jake stopped at the entrance, peering into the darkness. The alley was cramped, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Trash bins lined one wall, and the smell of old garbage mixed with damp concrete hung heavy in the air. The kitten paused halfway down the alley and looked back at Jake. Its green eyes caught the light from the street lamp behind him, glowing with an intensity that made Jake's chest tighten. The kitten meowed once, loud and insistent, then continued forward. Jake hesitated. Every instinct he'd developed over 7 years of police work told him to radio this in, to get backup, to follow protocol. But something about the kitten's determination stopped him. This wasn't random. This wasn't a game. The animal was trying to tell him something. He stepped into the alley. The kitten led him past overflowing trash bins and broken cardboard boxes, staying just a few feet ahead. The alley felt colder here, darker, like the light from the street couldn't quite reach all the way in. Jake's hand moved instinctively to his flashlight, clicking it on and sweeping the beam across the narrow space. Then the kitten stopped. It sat down directly in front of a large green dumpster pushed against the far wall and stared at it. Not at Jake, not at the ground, at the dumpster. Jake approached slowly, the beam of his flashlight dancing across rusted metal and peeling paint. "What is it, little guy? What are you trying to show me?" The kitten meowed again, louder this time, almost frantic. It pawed at the ground near the base of the dumpster, then looked up at Jake as if to say, "Here, right here." Jake knelt down, shining his light along the base of the dumpster. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just concrete, dirt, and scattered bits of trash. But then he noticed it, a cardboard box partially hidden in the narrow gap between the dumpster and the brick wall. His heart started beating faster. He reached out and pulled the box toward him, the cardboard damp and weak in his hands. It felt heavier than it should have. Something was inside. Jake set the box down in front of him and carefully pulled back the flaps. His breath caught in his throat. Inside, wrapped in what looked like an old, dirty towel, was a puppy. Tiny, trembling. Its body was so thin that Jake could see the outline of its ribs through its matted brown fur. The puppy's eyes were half closed, glazed with exhaustion and fear. It didn't move when Jake opened the box. It just lay there, shivering violently, too weak to do much else. "Oh, God," Jake whispered. The kitten immediately moved closer, pressing its small body against the side of the box and meowing softly. Not urgently now, gently, like it was trying to comfort the puppy. Jake's hands trembled as he reached into the box and carefully lifted the puppy out. The little creature was so light it felt like holding air. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, each breath a struggle. Jake could feel the puppy's heartbeat against his palm, fast, erratic, barely there. Hey, it's okay," Jake murmured, cradling the puppy against his chest. "You're safe now. I've got you." The puppy's eyes flickered open for just a moment, looking up at Jake with an expression so desperate and helpless that it felt like a punch to the gut. Then the eyes closed again, and the puppy's body went limp in his hands. Panic surged through Jake. He pressed 2 fingers gently against the puppy's chest, searching for a heartbeat. It was there, weak but there. The puppy was alive. Barely. Jake grabbed his radio with his free hand. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need animal control and emergency veterinary services at the alley behind 4th and Maple Street. I've got a severely malnourished puppy, possible hypothermia. Needs immediate medical attention. Copy that, Unit 7. Dispatching now. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Jake looked down at the puppy in his arms. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. He quickly pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around the tiny body, trying to generate warmth. The puppy didn't respond, didn't move, just kept breathing those shallow, struggling breaths. The kitten sat beside him, watching intently. It reached out one small paw and gently touched the puppy's head, as if checking to make sure it was still alive. The gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that Jake felt his throat tighten. "You knew, didn't you?" Jake said quietly, looking at the kitten. "You knew this puppy was here. You came to find someone who could help." The kitten blinked slowly and meowed once, soft and sad. Jake had seen a lot in his years as a cop. He'd pulled people out of car wrecks. He'd talked down men holding weapons. He'd delivered bad news to families who'd lost loved ones. But this tiny kitten leading him to an abandoned, dying puppy, hit him differently. It hit him somewhere deeper, because this wasn't just about survival. This was about loyalty, about one small creature refusing to abandon another, about love in its purest, most unselfish form. Jake gently stroked the puppy's head with one finger. "You're going to make it, little one, I promise. You're going to make it." The kitten pressed closer to Jake's side as if it understood, as if it knew that help was finally here. Minutes ticked by in agonizing slowness. Jake kept the puppy tucked against his chest, feeling the faint rise and fall of its breathing. He talked to it softly, not knowing if the puppy could hear him, but needing to say something. Anything. "You're tough, you know that? Tougher than you look. Just hang on a little longer. Help's coming. Just hang on." The kitten never moved. It stayed right there, its green eyes fixed on the puppy, keeping vigil. Finally, Jake heard the sound of tires on pavement. Headlights illuminated the mouth of the alley, and a white van with animal control printed on the side pulled up. Two people jumped out, a man and a woman, both moving quickly with medical kits in hand. "Officer Reynolds," the woman called out. "Here." Jake stood up carefully, still cradling the puppy. "It's bad. The puppy's been abandoned, probably for days. Severe malnutrition, possible dehydration, hypothermia." The woman, her name tag read Dr. Martinez, knelt down immediately and began examining the puppy with practiced efficiency. She pulled out a small oxygen mask and placed it gently over the puppy's muzzle. Within seconds, the puppy's breathing seemed to ease slightly. "Good call getting us here fast," Dr. Martinez said. "Another hour, and we might have lost this one." Jake exhaled, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Will it be okay?" "Hard to say right now, but we'll do everything we can. Come on, let's get this little guy to the clinic." As Dr. Martinez carefully transferred the puppy into a portable carrier lined with heating pads, the kitten suddenly moved. It jumped up onto Jake's leg, meowing loudly, then hopped down and ran toward the carrier, pressing its nose against the mesh side. Dr. Martinez paused. "That your cat, officer?" "No," Jake said. "That's the one who led me here. The kitten found the puppy first. It came to get me." Dr. Martinez and her partner exchanged a look. That's incredible," she said softly. She looked down at the kitten, who was still pressed against the carrier, meowing at the puppy inside. "You want to bring the kitten too? I think they might need each other." Jake nodded, scooping up the kitten gently. It didn't resist. It just settled into his arms, still watching the carrier where the puppy lay. As they walked toward the van, Jake looked down at the kitten in his arms. Its scruffy gray fur was matted and dirty, but its eyes, those bright green eyes, held something Jake couldn't quite name. Intelligence, purpose, love. "You're something special, you know that?" Jake whispered. The kitten purred softly, a sound so small and fragile it almost broke him. By the time they reached the veterinary clinic, Jake's shift had officially ended hours ago. But he didn't care. He stayed, pacing the waiting room while Dr. Martinez and her team worked on stabilizing the puppy. The kitten sat on a chair beside him, calm now, as if it knew the worst was over. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, Dr. Martinez emerged, pulling off her gloves with a tired but satisfied smile. "The puppy's going to make it," she said. "It'll take time, but with proper care and nutrition, full recovery is possible." Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. Thank God. Thank this little guy, actually. Dr. Martinez nodded toward the kitten. "If it hadn't led you there when it did, we'd be having a very different conversation." Jake looked at the kitten, who was now grooming its paw as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if leading a police officer through the streets to save a dying puppy was just another Tuesday night. But Jake knew better. He knew that what had happened tonight wasn't ordinary. It wasn't random. It was something deeper, something that reminded him why he'd become a cop in the first place, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. To be there when it mattered most. And tonight, a tiny, scruffy kitten had done exactly that. As Jake sat back down in the waiting room chair, the kitten climbed into his lap and curled up, purring softly. Jake rested his hand gently on its back and closed his eyes. He didn't know the full story yet, didn't know where the kitten had come from or how it had found the puppy. But he knew one thing for certain. This night was far from over. Because now, Jake had questions, and he wasn't going to stop until he found answers. As the kitten dozed in Jake's lap and the puppy fought for its life in the next room, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The kitten had a collar. He'd noticed it briefly in the alley. A name tag. And that meant someone, somewhere, was looking for this little hero. But who? And why had the kitten been out there alone in the first place? The answers were waiting, and they would change everything. As the kitten dozed in Jake's lap and the puppy fought for its life in the next room, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The kitten had a collar. He'd noticed it briefly in the alley, a name tag, and that meant someone, somewhere, was looking for this little hero. But who? And why had the kitten been out there alone in the first place? The answers were waiting, and they would change everything. Jake sat in the quiet waiting room, the kitten curled peacefully in his lap. The overhead lights hummed softly, and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the sky, painting it in shades of pale orange and pink. He'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. His hand rested gently on the kitten's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breathing. The little creature had finally relaxed, its body warm and trusting against him. Jake's mind was racing, replaying the events of the night over and over. The desperate meowing, the urgent pull through the streets, the discovery of the puppy barely clinging to life. It was then, in the soft glow of the waiting room light, that Jake noticed something he'd missed before. A collar. It was partially hidden beneath the kitten's scruffy gray fur, thin and worn, but definitely there. Jake carefully lifted the fur away and examined it. The collar was red, faded from what must have been months of wear, and attached to it, dangling slightly to one side, was a small metal tag. Jake's heart quickened. He gently lifted the tag and angled it toward the light. Engraved on the front was a single name, Charlie, and beneath it a phone number. Jake stared at the tag for a long moment, his thumb tracing the engraved letters. Charlie. The kitten had a name, which meant someone, somewhere, had loved this little creature enough to give it one. Someone was missing it, maybe even looking for it right now. But why had Charlie been alone in the streets? Why had no one come looking for him in the weeks since he'd disappeared? Jake pulled out his phone, his fingers hesitating over the screen. It was just past 5 in the morning. Whoever owned this number might still be asleep. But then again, if someone had lost their pet 2 weeks ago, they'd probably want to know immediately that it had been found. He dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, on the 4th ring, someone picked up. "Hello?" The voice was female, breathless, like she'd run to grab the phone. "Hello, who is this?" "Ma'am, my name is Officer Jake Reynolds with the Brooksville Police Department. I'm calling because I found a kitten wearing a collar with this number on it. The name on the tag is Charlie." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Then silence. Then a sound that might have been a sob. "Charlie," the woman's voice cracked. "You found Charlie? Oh my God, is he okay? Is he hurt?" "He's fine, ma'am," Jake said quickly, his voice gentle. "He's right here with me. He's safe. A little dirty, a little thin, but he's okay." The woman started crying, deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere raw and broken. "I can't believe it. I've been looking for him for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I thought I'd never see him again." Jake felt his chest tighten. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened? How did Charlie go missing?" The woman took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself. "My name is Emily Harrington. Charlie was my therapy animal. I trained him myself. He's not just a pet, he's special." "Special how?" Jake asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. "Charlie was trained to detect emotional distress in animals," Emily said, her voice still thick with tears. "I work with a rescue organization. We place abused and abandoned animals in foster homes, and Charlie helps us find the ones who need help most. He can sense when an animal is in danger or suffering, even when humans can't see it. He's saved more lives than I can count." Jake looked down at the kitten, at Charlie, who had opened one eye and was watching him calmly, as if he understood every word being said. "2 weeks ago," Emily continued, "we were at a rescue site, an abandoned warehouse where someone had reported hearing animals. Charlie went inside ahead of me, like he always does, but there was a collapse. Part of the ceiling came down. I got out, but Charlie—" Her voice broke again. "I couldn't find him. I searched for hours, days. I put up flyers, called every shelter, checked every street. I thought he was gone." Jake's throat felt tight. "Ms. Harrington, I need to tell you something. Charlie didn't just wander into town. He led me to something tonight. He led me to an abandoned puppy that was dying. If it wasn't for Charlie, that puppy wouldn't have made it." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Emily's voice, barely a whisper. "He found another one?" "Yes, ma'am. He did exactly what you trained him to do." Emily let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's my boy. That's my Charlie. Even lost and alone, he kept doing his job. He kept saving lives." Jake felt something warm and heavy settle in his chest. He looked down at Charlie, who was now purring softly, his eyes half closed in contentment. This wasn't just a kitten. This was a hero. a small, scruffy, unassuming hero who had been fulfilling his purpose even when no one was watching, even when he was scared and lost and alone. "Ms. Harrington," Jake said, "I'm at the Brooksville Veterinary Clinic. The puppy Charlie found is being treated here. If you want to come pick him up." "I'm on my way," Emily interrupted, her voice firm now, filled with determination. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Please just keep him safe until I get there." "I will," Jake promised. "I'm not going anywhere." The line went dead. Jake set his phone down and looked at Charlie, who was now fully awake and staring up at him with those intelligent green eyes. Eyes that had seen things. Eyes that understood things most people and most animals never would. "You're something else, Charlie," Jake said softly. "You know that?" Charlie meowed once, a small, contented sound, and stretched his front paws out, kneading gently against Jake's leg. The pieces were falling into place now. The urgency in Charlie's movements, the way he'd refused to let Jake ignore him, the determination with which he'd led Jake through the streets and into that dark alley. Charlie hadn't been lost. Not really. He'd been on a mission, and even separated from his owner, even scared and alone in an unfamiliar town, he'd done exactly what he'd been trained to do. He'd saved a life. Jake's radio crackled on his belt. "Unit 7, what's your status?" Jake grabbed the radio. "Unit 7 to dispatch. I'm still at the veterinary clinic. Animals stable. Waiting for owner to arrive. I'll file a full report when I'm back at the station." "Copy that, Unit 7. Good work tonight." Good work. Jake almost laughed. He hadn't done anything. Charlie had done all the work. Charlie had been the one with the courage, the instinct, the pure, selfless determination to save another creature in need. Jake had just been the person Charlie chose to follow. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Jake stayed in the waiting room, Charlie still nestled in his lap, both of them waiting. Dr. Martinez had come out once to update him. The puppy was responding well to treatment, eating small amounts of food, and showing signs of recovery. It would take weeks, maybe months, but the puppy would live. Because of Charlie. Finally, the clinic door burst open and a woman rushed in. She was in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and tear-streaked cheeks. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt that looked like she'd thrown them on in a hurry. Her eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on Jake and on the small gray kitten in his lap. "Charlie!" she cried. Charlie's head shot up. His ears perked. And then, with a speed Jake didn't think was possible, the kitten launched himself out of Jake's lap and straight into Emily's arms. Emily caught him, sobbing, clutching him to her chest like he was the most precious thing in the world. "Oh my God, Charlie, my sweet boy, I thought I lost you. I thought you were gone." Charlie buried his face in Emily's neck, purring so loudly Jake could hear it from across the room. Emily sank into a chair, holding Charlie tightly, rocking him back and forth like a child. Jake stood, giving them space, but Emily looked up at him with red, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for finding him. Thank you for calling me. Thank you for—" She couldn't finish. She just held Charlie tighter. Jake nodded, his own throat tight. "He's the one who found me, ma'am. I was just following where he led." Emily smiled through her tears. "That's what he does. That's what he's always done." Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, a small smile on her face. "Miss Harrington?" Emily looked up, still holding Charlie. "Yes? The puppy Charlie found is stable. If you'd like to see him, I can take you back." Emily stood immediately, cradling Charlie in her arms. She looked at Jake. "Will you come with me? I want you to see what Charlie saved." Jake nodded. "I'd like that." They followed Dr. Martinez down a narrow hallway lined with examination rooms. At the end of the hall, she opened a door to a recovery room where several kennels were lined up against the wall. In the smallest kennel, wrapped in blankets and hooked up to an IV, was the puppy. It was awake now, its eyes clearer than they'd been in the alley. When it saw Charlie, its tail gave a weak wag. Charlie meowed softly, and Emily knelt down, holding him close to the kennel so the two animals could see each other. The puppy stretched its nose forward, pressing it gently against the bars. Charlie reached out a paw and touched the puppy's nose, and for a moment the two just stayed there, connected. Jake felt his eyes sting. He turned away, blinking hard. Emily stood, still holding Charlie, and looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, respect, something deeper. "You saved them both tonight, Officer Reynolds," she said quietly. Jake shook his head. "No, ma'am. Charlie did. I was just lucky enough to listen." Emily smiled, a real smile this time. "That's all any of us can do. Listen and act when it matters." They stood there in the quiet recovery room, 3 humans and 2 small animals, all connected by a single night that had changed everything. And Jake realized, as he watched Charlie nuzzle against Emily's cheek and the puppy settle back into its blankets, that this was why he'd become a cop. Not for the big busts or the commendations or the adrenaline. For moments like this. For the small, quiet victories that reminded him that the world, despite everything, was still full of love, still full of creatures, human and animal alike, who refused to give up, who kept fighting, who kept caring. Even when it would have been easier not to. As Jake finally headed home in the early morning light, his uniform rumpled and his heart full, he thought about Charlie's journey. 2 weeks lost, 2 weeks alone, and still the kitten had never stopped doing what it was meant to do. But there was one question Jake couldn't shake. Why had Charlie ended up in Brooksville in the first place? And was there more to this story than even Emily knew? Jake didn't go home that morning. He should have. His shift had ended hours ago, and his captain would probably have words for him about overtime and proper reporting procedures. But Jake couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. Not when the puppy's life was still hanging in the balance, and not when Charlie, small, determined Charlie, was still keeping vigil beside the recovery kennel. Emily had stayed too. She sat in one of the plastic chairs in the clinic's recovery room, Charlie curled in her lap, both of them watching the puppy breathe. Dr. Martinez and her assistant moved in and out of the room, checking vitals, adjusting IV drips, monitoring progress. The puppy had been stabilized, but it wasn't out of danger yet. Severe malnutrition took a toll on the body that couldn't be fixed overnight. The puppy's organs had been stressed, its immune system compromised. Every hour that passed without complications was a small victory. Jake paced near the window, unable to sit still. His mind kept replaying the moment he'd opened that cardboard box in the alley. The way the puppy had looked at him with those half-closed, desperate eyes. The way its tiny body had trembled in his hands. The way Charlie had pressed against the box, refusing to leave the puppy's side. "Officer Reynolds," Dr. Martinez said, pulling him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Jake nodded and followed her into the hallway, leaving Emily and Charlie in the recovery room. Dr. Martinez leaned against the wall, looking tired but focused. "I wanted to update you on the puppy's condition. It's improving, but it's still critical." The next 12 hours are crucial. If the puppy can maintain stable vitals through the night, the prognosis improves significantly. And if it doesn't? Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Martinez's expression softened. Then we'll do everything we can. But I have to be honest with you, this puppy has been through severe trauma, physically and emotionally. Even if it survives, recovery will take months. It'll need constant care, specialized feeding, behavioral rehabilitation. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. What happens after? If it survives, where does it go? Usually, we'd place it with a rescue organization or foster home, Dr. Martinez said. But given the circumstances and the bond between the puppy and that kitten, I think Ms. Harrington might have some ideas. Jake glanced back toward the recovery room. Through the small window in the door, he could see Emily still sitting there, Charlie in her lap, both of them watching the puppy with unwavering attention. She's a good person, Jake said quietly. Charlie's lucky to have her. And that puppy's lucky you found it, Dr. Martinez replied. She placed a hand briefly on Jake's shoulder. You did good work tonight, officer. Don't forget that. Jake nodded, but the words didn't quite sink in. He didn't feel like he'd done good work. He felt like he'd been pulled along by forces beyond his control, guided by a tiny kitten with a mission he hadn't fully understood until it was already over. When he returned to the recovery room, Emily looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but there was a calmness to her now, a quiet strength. He's getting stronger, she said, nodding toward the puppy. Look. Jake moved closer to the kennel. The puppy was awake, its eyes clearer than they'd been before. It shifted slightly in its blankets, adjusting its position with a little more energy than it had shown earlier. Its breathing was deeper, steadier. The IV drip continued to feed nutrients into its tiny body, and the heating pad beneath the blankets kept its temperature regulated. Charlie meowed softly from Emily's lap, and the puppy's ears perked up. The puppy looked toward Charlie, and its tail gave a small, weak wag. Jake felt something twist in his chest. That tiny gesture, a tail wag, meant everything. It meant hope. It meant the puppy was fighting. It meant that maybe, just maybe, this story would have a happy ending. Can I ask you something? Jake said, pulling up a chair beside Emily. Of course, she replied. How did Charlie know? How did he know the puppy was there, in that alley, behind that dumpster? It's not like the puppy was crying out or making noise. It was barely conscious. Emily smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Charlie doesn't rely on sound or sight the way we do. He senses things. Distress, fear, pain. It's like he can feel it in the air. I've seen him find animals in places no human would ever think to look. Under floorboards, inside walls, buried in rubble. He just knows. Jake shook his head in amazement. That's incredible. It is, Emily agreed. But it's also exhausting for him. Emotionally, I mean. He takes on so much. He feels so much. After every rescue, he needs time to recover, to process what he's been through. She looked down at Charlie, stroking his head gently. When he disappeared 2 weeks ago, I was terrified. Not just because I missed him, but because I knew he'd keep trying to help animals even when he was lost and scared himself. That's just who he is. Jake looked at Charlie, who was now grooming one of his paws with slow, deliberate licks. The kitten looked so ordinary in that moment, so unassuming. But Jake knew better now. He understood that beneath that scruffy gray fur was a heart bigger than most humans possessed. You trained him well, Jake said. Emily shook her head. I didn't train him to care. That was already in him. I just taught him how to channel it, how to guide people to the animals who needed help. But the compassion, the loyalty, that was all Charlie. They sat in companionable silence for a while, both watching the puppy breathe. Time felt suspended in that small recovery room, as if the outside world had stopped spinning, and all that mattered was the fragile life in the kennel and the brave little kitten who had saved it. Then, around mid-morning, something shifted. The puppy stirred, lifting its head slightly. Its eyes opened fully, not the glazed, half-aware look from before, but clear and focused. The puppy looked around the room, taking in its surroundings, and then its gaze landed on Charlie. The puppy made a sound, a soft, high-pitched whine that wasn't distress but recognition. Connection. Charlie's ears perked up immediately. He jumped down from Emily's lap and padded over to the kennel, pressing his nose against the bars. The puppy stretched forward as much as the IV would allow and touched its nose to Charlie's through the metal grating. And in that moment, something inside Jake broke open. He'd been holding it together all night, staying professional, staying focused, but watching these two small creatures, one who had fought so hard to survive and one who had refused to give up until help arrived, connect with such pure, unfiltered love, it was too much. Jake felt his eyes burn. He tried to blink the tears away, tried to swallow past the lump in his throat, but it was useless. A tear slipped down his cheek, then another. He turned away quickly, not wanting Emily to see, but she'd already noticed. "It's okay," she said gently. "I cried too. The first time I saw Charlie save an animal, I sobbed for an hour." Jake wiped at his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed but also strangely relieved. "I'm sorry. I don't usually—" "Don't apologize," Emily interrupted. "What you're feeling right now, that's what it means to care. That's what it means to be human. And trust me, Charlie understands that better than anyone." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as Charlie continued to comfort the puppy through the kennel bars, his small paw reaching through to touch the puppy's face. "You saved him, didn't you?" Jake whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Charlie or to himself. "You saved us both." Because that's what it felt like Charlie hadn't just saved the puppy's life. He'd reminded Jake of something he'd forgotten somewhere along the way. That compassion mattered. That small acts of kindness could change everything. That even in the darkest alleys and the coldest nights, there was still hope. Dr. Martinez returned a few hours later with better news. The puppy's vitals had stabilized completely. Its body temperature was normal. It had eaten a small amount of food and kept it down. The worst had passed. "I think we're out of the danger zone," Dr. Martinez said, smiling. "This little one's a fighter." Emily let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Thank God. Jake felt his shoulders sag with relief. The tension he'd been carrying since the moment he'd found the puppy finally began to ease. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Dr. Martinez looked at Emily. "That depends." "Are you willing to foster?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. I'll take both of them. Charlie and the puppy. They need each other." "I was hoping you'd say that," Dr. Martinez said. "The puppy will need around-the-clock care for at least the next few weeks. Frequent feedings, medication, monitoring. It's a big commitment." "I know," Emily said firmly, "and I'm ready." Jake looked at her with deep respect. This woman, who had just been reunited with her own lost pet, was already opening her heart to another animal in need. It was the kind of selflessness he rarely saw, even in his line of work. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Jake asked. Emily smiled. "You've already done more than enough, Officer Reynolds, but if you want to check in on them sometime, I'd like that. I think Charlie would too." Jake nodded. "I'd like that." As the afternoon sun streamed through the clinic windows, Jake finally allowed himself to believe that everything was going to be okay. The puppy would recover. Charlie had been reunited with his owner. And somehow, in the middle of one of the longest nights of his life, Jake had been reminded why he'd chosen this job in the first place. Not for the authority or the uniform, not for the adrenaline or the recognition, but for moments like this, moments when lives were saved, when hope was restored, when love, in its purest, most unexpected forms, proved stronger than fear or pain or abandonment. Before he left the clinic, Jake knelt down beside Charlie one last time. The kitten looked up at him with those intelligent green eyes, and Jake could have sworn he saw understanding there. Gratitude. Connection. "Thank you," Jake whispered, "for choosing me, for trusting me." Charlie meowed once, soft and gentle, and rubbed his head against Jake's hand. And Jake knew, in that moment, that he would never forget this night, never forget the scruffy little kitten who had led him into a dark alley and changed his life forever. As Jake finally drove home, the morning sun now fully risen, he felt lighter than he had in years. But he couldn't shake the lingering questions. Where had the puppy come from? Who had abandoned it? And was there more to this story, more animals still in danger, waiting for someone like Charlie to find them? 3 weeks had passed since that unforgettable night in the alley. Jake had kept his promise to Emily. He visited the puppy, now named Scout, twice a week, bringing supplies, checking in on the recovery progress, and spending time with both Scout and Charlie. Each visit felt less like an obligation and more like coming home to family he hadn't known he needed. Emily's house was small but warm, filled with the organized chaos of someone who dedicated their life to rescuing animals. There were kennels in the spare bedroom, medication schedules posted on the refrigerator, and bags of specialized pet food stacked in the pantry. But there was also laughter, wagging tails, and the kind of purposeful love that transformed a house into a sanctuary. Scout had made remarkable progress. The emaciated, trembling puppy Jake had found behind the dumpster was now gaining weight, growing stronger, and learning to trust again. Scout's coat had filled out into soft brown fur, and those once fearful eyes now sparkled with curiosity and growing confidence. But the most incredible thing was the bond between Scout and Charlie. They were inseparable. Charlie had appointed himself Scout's guardian, sleeping beside the puppy every night, grooming Scout's fur with patient dedication, and gently correcting the puppy when playtime got too rough. It was clear to everyone who saw them together that Charlie had claimed Scout as his own. "I've never seen anything like it," Emily told Jake during one of his visits. They sat on her back porch, watching Charlie and Scout play in the fenced yard. Charlie's worked with dozens of rescued animals, but he's never bonded with one like this. It's like Scout isn't just another rescue to him. Scout is family. Jake smiled, watching Charlie chase Scout across the grass, both animals tumbling over each other in a joyful mess of fur and paws. Maybe that's because Charlie knows what it's like to be lost, to need someone to find you. Emily nodded thoughtfully. "You're probably right." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Then Emily turned to Jake, her expression more serious. "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said. "Scout is almost ready for adoption. Physically, he's recovered incredibly well. Emotionally, he's learning to trust people again. The rescue organization has already received 3 applications from families who want to adopt him." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. He'd known this day was coming. Of course, Scout needed a permanent home. Of course, there were families out there who could give the puppy everything it needed. But the thought of Scout leaving, of not being able to visit anymore, of not seeing Charlie and Scout together, hit harder than Jake had expected. "That's good," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Scout deserves a family who can give him a real home." Emily studied his face carefully. "Jake, one of those applications is from you." Jake looked at her, confused. "What? I didn't. I submitted it on your behalf," Emily said gently. "Based on everything you've told me about your life, your schedule, your home, I know you live alone. I know you have the space, and I know that you and Scout have a connection that's just as real as the one between Scout and Charlie." Jake opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. Because she was right. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd found himself thinking about Scout constantly, wondering how the puppy was doing, looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with love. "Emily, I don't know if I'm qualified, prepared, good enough," Emily interrupted with a knowing smile. "Those are the same things every good pet parent worries about. But here's what I know. Scout trusts you. And more importantly, Charlie trusts you. That kitten doesn't trust just anyone, Jake. He sees something in you." Jake looked out at the yard, where Charlie and Scout had collapsed into a tired heap, panting happily in the shade. His throat felt tight. "What about Charlie?" Jake asked. "If Scout leaves, won't they miss each other?" Emily's smile widened. "That's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. How do you feel about adopting 2 animals instead of 1? Jake's head snapped toward her. "Wait, you mean—" "Charlie's mission has always been to help animals in need," Emily explained. "But I think his mission with Scout is different. I think Charlie needs Scout just as much as Scout needs him. And honestly—" She paused, her eyes glistening slightly. "I think Charlie has chosen where he wants to be, and it's with Scout. And with you." Jake felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "Emily, I can't ask you to give up Charlie. He's your partner, your companion. You trained him. You've been searching for him. And I found him," Emily said softly. "Or rather, he found his way home. But Jake, Charlie's home isn't a place. It's wherever he's needed most. And right now, Scout needs him. And I think you do too." Jake felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Emily reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "You saved them both, Jake. And I think they want to save you back, if you'll let them." Jake looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of police work. Hands that had held weapons, written reports, and restrained criminals. But also hands that had cradled a dying puppy in a dark alley and gently stroked a kitten's scruffy fur. "I don't know how to do this," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've lived alone for years. I work long shifts. I'm not sure I know how to take care of—" "You'll figure it out," Emily said with quiet confidence, "because you care, and that's all that really matters." 2 days later, Jake stood in Emily's living room with an empty pet carrier in each hand and a heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. Scout sat at his feet, tail wagging, looking up at him with complete trust. Charlie sat beside Scout, calm and composed, as if he'd known all along that this moment was coming. Emily handed Jake a folder filled with medical records, feeding schedules, and emergency contact information. Everything you need is in here. But you can call me any time, day or night. I mean it. Thank you, Jake said, and the words felt inadequate for everything she'd given him. Not just the animals, but the chance to become the person he'd forgotten he could be. Emily knelt down and pulled Charlie into one last embrace. She buried her face in his fur, whispering something Jake couldn't hear. When she stood, tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Take care of them," she said, "and let them take care of you." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He carefully placed Scout and Charlie into their carriers, made sure they were secure, and carried them out to his truck. The drive home was quiet. Jake kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the two carriers strapped into the back seat. Scout whimpered occasionally, nervous about the unfamiliar movement, but each time Charlie would meow softly and Scout would calm down. Even now, Charlie was taking care of Scout, protecting him, guiding him. When Jake pulled into his driveway, he sat for a moment, staring at his small house. It had felt empty for so long, just a place to sleep between shifts, a place to exist but not really live. But now, with Scout and Charlie in the back seat, it felt different. It felt like the beginning of something. Jake carried both carriers inside and set them down in the living room. He opened Scout's carrier first, and the puppy bounded out, immediately exploring every corner of the room with excited curiosity. Then he opened Charlie's carrier, and the kitten stepped out with dignified grace, surveying his new surroundings with those intelligent green eyes. For a moment, Jake just stood there, watching them. Watching Scout sniff at the furniture and Charlie leap onto the windowsill to look outside. Watching two animals who had found each other in the darkest circumstances now begin a new chapter in a place of safety and love. And then it hit him. The full weight of everything that had happened. The night he'd followed a scruffy kitten into the darkness. The moment he'd opened that cardboard box and found a dying puppy. The realization that Charlie had been lost and alone, but had never stopped doing what he was meant to do. The journey from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. Jake sank onto the couch, and the tears he'd been holding back for weeks finally broke free. They came in waves, deep, shaking sobs that rose from somewhere he'd kept locked away for years. Sobs for the puppy who'd been abandoned, for the kitten who'd been lost, for Emily, who gave so much of herself to save animals in need, and for himself, for the loneliness he'd been carrying, the walls he'd built, the life he'd been living on autopilot. And there they sat, a broken police officer and two rescued animals, all of them finding healing in each other's presence. "You saved us," Jake whispered through his tears, one hand on Scout's head and the other stroking Charlie's back. "Both of you. You saved me." Because that was the truth. Charlie hadn't just led Jake to Scout that night. Charlie had led Jake back to himself, back to the part of him that still believed in love and loyalty and second chances, back to the part of him that knew how to care, how to connect, how to be fully, messily, beautifully human. Jake stayed like that for a long time, holding both animals close, letting himself feel everything he'd been avoiding for years. The grief, the loneliness, the fear, and underneath all of it, the hope, the possibility, the chance to start again. Eventually, the tears stopped. Jake took a shaky breath and looked down at Scout and Charlie, both of them now dozing peacefully against him. "Okay," he said softly, a small smile breaking through. "Let's figure this out together." That night, Jake set up beds for both animals in his bedroom. He'd bought supplies after work: food bowls, toys, blankets, everything Emily had recommended. Scout claimed the larger bed immediately, circling 3 times before collapsing with a contented sigh. Charlie curled up in the smaller bed, but his eyes remained open, watching over Scout even as sleep tried to claim him. Jake lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle sounds of breathing that filled the room. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Emily. "How's the first night going?" Jake smiled and typed back, "Perfect. Thank you for everything." "Thank you. Charlie chose well. Sleep tight." Jake set the phone down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be a new day. There would be challenges, learning curves, adjustments, but he wouldn't face them alone. He had Scout. He had Charlie. And somewhere along the way, in a dark alley behind a dumpster, he'd found something he'd thought was lost forever. He'd found purpose, connection, love. And as Jake drifted off to sleep, Scout snoring softly and Charlie purring in the background, he realized something profound. Sometimes the smallest creatures carry the biggest lessons. Sometimes a scruffy kitten following a police officer through empty streets is exactly the miracle someone needs. Sometimes being saved looks like opening your heart to those who need saving just as much as you do. The night Charlie had found Jake, leading him with determined urgency through the streets of Brooksville, Jake had thought he was answering a call, responding to a situation, doing his job. But now he understood. Charlie hadn't been calling for help. Charlie had been offering it. And Jake, without even realizing it, had been the one who needed rescuing all along. 6 months later, Jake pulled into the parking lot of Emily's rescue center, Scout and Charlie both riding in the back seat. It had become their Saturday morning routine, visiting Emily, helping with the other rescued animals, and watching Charlie do what he did best. Scout had grown into a strong, healthy dog, full of energy and joy. Charlie remained the calm, steady presence, still guiding, still protecting, still sensing when an animal needed help. But now, they had a home, they had a family, they had Jake, and Jake had them. As they walked into the rescue center together, Emily looked up from the desk and smiled. "There's my favorite team." Jake grinned. "Put us to work." Because that's what they did now. Jake, Scout, and Charlie. They were a team. They helped Emily with rescues, fostered animals in need, and showed up when it mattered most. And every time Jake watched Charlie lead them to an animal in distress, every time he saw Scout comfort a frightened newcomer, every time he felt the weight of their trust and love, he was reminded of that night in the alley. The night he learned that the smallest acts of compassion could change everything. The night he learned that sometimes being found means finding yourself. The night a scruffy kitten refused to give up, and in refusing, saved more than just a puppy's life. That night, Charlie had saved them all. Sometimes the smallest creatures teach us the biggest lessons, about loyalty, about love, about refusing to give up even when everything seems lost. Charlie didn't just save Scout that night, he reminded Jake and all of us that compassion is never wasted, that every life matters, and that sometimes the best way to heal our own broken hearts is to open them to those who need us most. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the world is full of animals like Charlie and people like Jake, all waiting for the moment when they'll find each other, all waiting for the chance to be saved, and to save in return.